cookiers, it's Angela from Bake Angel and I am thrilled to be able to talk with you today all about allergy baking. Now this is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart, having developed a lot of food allergies later on in life, and I know the struggle when you're trying to adapt recipes but you're not quite sure what ingredients to substitute, what will work best with the recipes that you've tried and tested and have loved for years, and if you're just not sure where to start when it comes to allergy baking. Now, whether you have allergies yourself or you're hoping to add allergy-friendly cookies to your menu for your customers, hopefully this presentation will help answer some of those questions for you and demystify some of the things you may have heard mentioned in different cookie groups online too. So today I'm going to share a presentation with you that covers the main topics for allergy baking for cookies, and hopefully that will help you on your journey going forward. So before we dive into allergy baking, I thought I'd just give you a little bit more of information about my background. I'm a self-taught baker, and in recent years I've become really passionate about raising awareness for food allergies, particularly how those can relate to baking as well. Now, my own allergy journey started when I was a child, back in the day when allergies weren't really discussed. I've always had a moderate allergy to peanuts, but I did more recently start to develop food allergies later on in life when I started to have kids. Now, for some of you that may sound familiar, and you may have experienced something like that as well from having children. And of course, as we get older, some allergies can develop later in life. It's not necessarily something that happens from a young age. So my main allergy is dairy, and I do have an allergy-friendly baking blog where I talk about all the different substitutions that you can make in your recipes for a whole swathe of desserts that I grew up loving that obviously had most of the main allergens in. My husband and one of my children also has a dairy allergy, so it made sense for me to start to develop recipes that would fit our family, because I know there were things that they definitely craved as well that you can't necessarily buy in the grocery store. So when we think about cookie recipes, the main ingredients that all of us tend to use is some kind of flour, an egg or an egg substitute, some butter, maybe we use milk as well, maybe we use water, some sugar, generally some kind of flavouring, and you may use a raisin agent as well. We're going to focus on a couple of those main ingredients today. So we're going to talk about flour, which is something that affects people that have a gluten allergy or a celiac. We're also going to look at dairy with butter specifically, and the options that you can use to substitute that in your baking. Plus, we're also going to look at egg for those who either follow a vegan diet or maybe just have an egg allergy. And if you've ever had a customer that has asked you to make cookies that suit a certain type of allergy, immediately a lot of cookiers kind of say, well, I'm not actually an allergy-friendly kitchen, so that isn't something that I'm comfortable doing. And I think at a base level, that's a really good way to start off, because if you aren't comfortable with making those kind of substitutes, then you can be unsure of what you should use that would be safe for them. And of course, the type of allergy that they have can really dictate what you can and can't do for them. So let's talk about butter first. Now, butter is one of the main ingredients in sugar cookies, and generally people use a dairy butter for that. But what do you do if you have a dairy allergy? Well, first of all, we need to look at the function that butter actually adds to a cookie. It adds moisture and richness and flavour to baked goods as well. Plus, it can add a little bit of colour to them. And something that I've worked out through my own trial and error over the years is that non-dairy butters and regular dairy butter are most definitely not created equally. One of the things that you have to consider when you're looking at a good substitute for butter in your cookies is the water content of that product. And if you've ever had a look in the grocery stores at the type of options that are available for non-dairy ingredients, then often you'll see things that come in a tub, and sometimes you'll see block ones as well. Also, if you live in North America, you may see stick ones. Now let's just talk a little bit about the tub butters that are available. As a general rule of thumb, I do not suggest using these in your cookie recipes because they have a higher ratio of water in them, and the water content is actually partially responsible for your cookies spreading. And I know that that's frustrating for cookies when you're trying to get a recipe that doesn't spread and it retains its shape and those nice sharp edges. So you definitely want to keep away from those tub butter substitutions. They're also not going to be as good as the block type butters, which do actually set a lot firmer in the fridge. And when you look at them, they actually look very, very similar to dairy butter. And that's actually more of my preference that I prefer to use when I'm baking. There are a couple of brands that I personally use in Canada, and you may or may not be familiar with these. I use one which is a Basel brand, which comes in a block and also a tub, but I do just use the block version for that. Also, there's a brand which is widely available in North America called Country Crock, which bakes really, really well. But you do have to check the ingredients of what you're intending to use, because sometimes they can have hidden things in them that may actually be another allergen for your customers, such as soy or pea protein, and that's potentially a whole can of worms of things that can actually crop up when you start doing allergy baking. So always check with your customer if those additional ingredients are safe for them when you're considering using a butter substitute. Now, if you are on Team Butter and you're very nervous to use a substitution, you might be wondering what you can do to replicate that butter flavoring. And there are some really great flavoring options on the market which are vegan as well. So if you're looking to keep that nice butteriness, make sure you check out those for your cookie recipe. So next we're going to take a look at eggs. Now this is obviously one of the ingredients that is used in baking to bind everything together. It acts as a leavening agent. It can add moisture to your cookies and richness and color as well. So it will of course affect the consistency of your cookies, and that's something you need to consider if you are going to make cookies without eggs in them. Now I tend to make more of a shortbread type consistency of rollout cookie, which actually doesn't need an egg in it. And sometimes you'll find that when you do bake for allergies, your recipes may not actually need a direct replacement for the item you're removing. So for example, when I'm making the shortbread cookies, I would just be using sugar, flour and butter, which obviously would be my dairy-free butter. And here's a quick overview of the kind of things that you can use as an egg replacement in cookies. Now the number one thing that I like to use is water. It's nice and simple. It helps to add moisture to the cookies. It will bind all of your ingredients together. And obviously it's something that's really easily accessible as well. Now my second favorite substitute for eggs in cookies is actually applesauce, something that we always have in the house for our kids, and it's really great at adding moisture and also keeping a nice texture in the cookies as well. Now if you're concerned about the flavor that it may create in your cookies, if you normally use a flavoring, then that's really going to overshadow the apple flavor, and it is so slight that I don't think you'd even notice it. My general rule of thumb in any kind of baking, whether it's cookies or cakes or muffins, is that you want to substitute 1 egg with roughly 50 grams or a 1/4 cup of applesauce. And then the third alternative that is really great, which is very popular with vegan bakers, is actually making an egg from flaxseed. Now this is something that you can really easily make yourself. You just take some ground flaxseed, add water to it, mix it together until it forms a jelly-like consistency, and then you add it into your recipe as you would with your eggs. Now it binds everything together really well, but of course won't add any flavor to your cookies at all. So again, if you add flavor to your cookie dough, that's not something that you would be concerned about. Another alternative that I'll touch on briefly is actually aquafaba, which you may have heard of before. This is actually the liquid that you get in a can of chickpeas, and it's talked about quite a lot in baking, especially when anyone's making vegan royal icing, because that's what you would actually use instead of your egg white or meringue powder. Now, normally this is something that we would discard from a can of chickpeas, but that liquid actually works amazingly well just to whip up into a nice meringue kind of consistency. And we'll talk about that icing option a little bit later on. So now we're going to move on to the big one, which is flour. And if you've ever had someone come to you and ask if you're able to do gluten-free cookies, well, you can do a straight substitute for it by using something like one of the two ingredients that I'm showing here for you. So my preference is to use the Bob's Red Mill's 1-to-1 baking blend, and all of that hard work is done for you, so you don't need to add anything else to your recipe. Or you could use something like cassava flour, which is a really nice naturally gluten-free substitute that is available. But the main thing with a gluten allergy is you have to be very aware of whether they're celiac. Is it something that they're just choosing to remove from their diet because of their personal preference? Or is it actually because they need to remove it from their diet? And I would say that gluten probably is the one that people need to be most aware of when they're thinking of substitutions for baking, because it isn't really as simple as actually saying, yes, I'll just straight substitute the flour if you normally bake in a kitchen that uses regular flour. Now, for people that have celiac disease, that can actually cause a very severe reaction for them with their digestive system. So generally, my rule of thumb would be if someone came to me with a gluten-free request, I would actually direct them to someone that specializes in that and has a gluten-free kitchen, just because I wouldn't want to have any risk of cross-contamination for them, because it's very hard to actually keep a kitchen safe for gluten-free diets if you do generally use flour on occasion in your kitchen. So again, you need to just touch base with your customer, determine the level of allergy that they actually have. Some people for some allergies are actually okay with the risk of cross-contamination. Myself, I don't actually have an anaphylactic reaction to dairy, so I'm okay to actually consume items that have been made where dairy is also used, as long as I don't actually consume a product with it myself. And for those kind of allergies, you can really just safely sanitize your kitchen, clean it down, wipe everything over, and treat it like a new fresh batch when you are making for that. So now that we've talked about swapping ingredients in our cookie recipe, I wanted to touch on royal icing as well, because again, I know that's something that comes up quite a lot in cookie groups, and I've been asked about it in the past. So what do you do if someone comes to you and they need vegan royal icing, either because of their diet, or perhaps they have an egg intolerance, or even if you can't find meringue powder in the store, which I know can be hard to find at times recently? So there are actually quite a few options that you can use for vegan royal icing. And as I mentioned earlier, aquafaba generally seems to be the number one option that people will choose. And that's because it's very inexpensive to buy, and you can obviously do something with the chickpeas as well. And it's really great as that egg white substitute. Now, when you make royal icing with aquafaba, it will work in exactly the same way as regular royal icing made with meringue powder or egg white. And you would just make it with aquafaba and icing sugar, and then mixing everything together until you form the consistency that you need. Now, if you've never used aquafaba before, I should point out that it does have a little bit of a brownish color to it when you look at it. And also when you open the can, there's that familiar chickpea smell to it as well. And I know when I first started making vegan royal icing, that was something that I just kind of was a little bit unsure about, and whether it was something that would turn my icing a sort of tannish color. Well, the good news is that it actually doesn't, and I've never added white color into my royal icing either. It's actually quite surprising how well that color disappears by the time you add in all of your icing sugar when you're making your icing. And in terms of the odor as well, it's the same principle as when you start adding that icing sugar into it. It does take over more of that sweet smell. Plus, of course, you could add flavouring into your royal icing as well if you were concerned about it. But again, I can't really tell the difference once the icing is made. They look the same, they work the same, you would store it the same as well, and it colours up beautifully too. So while we're talking about vegan royal icing, let's quickly show you how easy it is to make. And the beauty of this type of icing is that it does only need those 2 ingredients. So I'm starting here with 1 can of chickpeas, and the can size that I'm using is 540 ml or 19 fluid ounces. You're going to start by opening that can, draining the chickpeas out in a sieve over a mixing bowl so you can keep those chickpeas to make something else, like maybe hummus or even to roast them, which is really nice. And then we're going to use that liquid. So I suggest making this in a stand mixer bowl because you are going to mix it for a little while. Add the aquafaba to your stand mixer and mix it on low for 2 minutes with the whisk attachment until you start to see tiny air bubbles form. Now, if you think about when you use meringue powder, this is a very similar process where you would add your meringue powder and your water to your mixing bowl and mix that together until it starts to combine and froth up. Once you see those air bubbles forming, you're then going to increase the speed of your mixer to a medium, which is a 5 on a KitchenAid, and keep whisking it until the aquafaba increases in volume and becomes whiter in color as well. So it's exactly like making a meringue at this stage. You're just whipping lots and lots of air into it so we can get some real volume created. Now we're going to go on to add in our icing sugar, and we're going to use quite a lot of that for this recipe because it does make a big full batch of royal icing. So I tend to buy the 1 kilograms of icing sugar here in Canada. We're only actually going to use about 2 pounds, which is roughly 900 grams or 7.5 US cups of icing sugar. And you're going to add that in 2 stages so that you avoid that big puff of icing going everywhere when you start to mix it in. So add half of it to the mixing bowl, start to combine it slowly, then turn your speed up to a medium, which is about a 5 or 6, and start to stir everything together. Now I do suggest that you scrape down the bowl a couple of times as well, and then once it has combined, add the rest of that icing sugar and then continue to mix it on a medium speed for about 6 minutes. Now that's going to leave you with a really nice light and fluffy consistency of icing, which is kind of on the edge of more of a medium to a stiff peak. So if you generally are making a big batch of icing for flood consistency, you would want to add just a little bit of water to it to turn it into flood or hybrid consistency icing. And that's how easy it is to make vegan royal icing. I honestly don't think it gets any simpler than that. And it's definitely a great alternative, like I said before, if you have someone who has an egg allergy or is following a vegan diet, or simply because you can't find meringue powder. Now, if you do have a customer that does have an allergy to chickpeas or legumes, then there are other alternatives out there as well. You could make more of a royal icing glaze, which would just be water and icing sugar. You could also add a little bit of a plant-based milk to it as well if you wanted to make it a little bit thicker. And of course, there are other options of mixes that you can buy on the market these days, although I myself have never tried them. Whilst we're on the subject of icing as well, I did want to touch on icing sugar, as this is something that does actually get bandied around in the cookie groups a lot, and that's whether icing sugar is actually vegan or not. So my personal recommendation is that you always double check the ingredients on the packaging of the brand that you purchase, and if you're in doubt, double check on their website, as most companies will have an FAQ on there which will contain some kind of questions and answers as to whether an item is gluten-free, whether it's vegan, and specifically for powdered sugar, whether they actually use bone char in it. Now, bone char is something in the past that companies have used to actually whiten powdered sugar. So again, if you are baking and icing cookies for someone that is vegan, you definitely don't want to use icing sugar that has bone char in it. Now, I live in Canada and the brand that I use is Red Path. Theirs is certified vegan, so I know it's perfectly safe for my family to use, and it's also great for vegans as well, which is fantastic news. So just double check the ingredients of the ones that you use. So now we're going to move on to a couple of other items that you need to consider if you are baking for allergies. And these are things that may not be obvious to you if you've never looked at the ingredients in detail before. So when I started my allergy journey, something that I didn't realize and I'd never really thought about before was the amount of everyday items that actually have milk or dairy in them. And sometimes it's not obvious if it may be in there as whey or casein. And if you're not looking for those things, you may not realize that somebody with a dairy allergy can't have certain products that you would take for granted would be okay in cookie decorating. So the list that I'm displaying here does give a quick overview of some of the main red flags when it comes to hidden ingredients for food allergies. You can see that I've already touched on the dairy ones, but there's also a couple of ones to look out for eggs and also gluten as well. Now, of course, this list is not exhaustive. There are many, many more terms for these particular allergies, so make sure you're double checking your ingredients before you start baking for someone with allergies. Now, if you're a fan of using sprinkles, just a heads up that a lot of sprinkles that are on the market do actually contain dairy. Some of them actually use dairy to help with the colouring in them, especially when you have white sprinkles. Sometimes they have whey in them as well, which is a big no-no for anyone with a dairy allergy. And also, if your customer is vegan, sometimes they even include confectioner's glaze, which generally actually isn't a vegan product. I'll let you Google that one so you can see what that's actually made from. But the great news is that there are more and more brands coming out all the time that do sell vegan sprinkles. Sweeter Polita is one that immediately springs to mind, and I know that there's quite a few options on Amazon as well. So definitely check those out if you need to use sprinkles for an order for someone that has a dairy allergy or is vegan. In terms of food colouring, a lot of the main brands of food colouring that are out there, like Americolour and Colour Mill, are usually vegan, which is fantastic news. Now, it's not really surprising because you shouldn't really have dairy in food colouring, but like I said before, it does crop up in some of the craziest places, so it's definitely worth checking the ingredients of any of the items that you generally use. So let's just have a quick recap of everything that we've covered today. So the main takeaway is that if you are selling to the public, always double check with your customer when they come to you and say that they have some type of allergy that they're asking you to accommodate. Be open with them if you don't feel comfortable making substitutions, or if you feel that you can't safely bake for them as well. I know as someone with allergies that I always appreciate honesty if someone doesn't feel that they're able to accommodate my order, rather than somebody making a mistake that could actually have some serious consequences for them. Also, double and maybe even triple check the ingredients of your items as well. As we mentioned earlier on, some allergens can crop up in the strangest of places, and whilst you may think that something would probably be safe, it's always worth triple checking. I know even a few years into my allergy journey that some things still trip me up, and I'm always reading labels now because being aware is much better than making a guess because you think something might be safe. And to go over quickly the main 3 areas that we covered. So for gluten-free, I would generally always recommend that you reach out to a gluten-free kitchen that can accommodate orders, unless you feel that you can actually make your kitchen gluten-free friendly. Some bakers may have the option of a second kitchen, which they can then use separate ingredients for gluten-free, which is fantastic. But if that's not you, have a serious think of whether you want to go down the route of offering gluten-free when you are baking with regular flour as well. In terms of egg, we talked about all the different substitution options that are available, and I'll just do a quick summary here of those. So you can use water, you can use applesauce with a ratio of 50 grams or a quarter cup of applesauce for every egg in your recipe. You can use aquafaba, which is the liquid from the chickpeas. You could also use plant-based milk if you wanted to as well. Although, of course, if you're using any kind of plant-based alternative, make sure that that isn't an allergen concern for your customers as well. Or you could make a flax egg or even a chia seed egg, which is one of my preferences as well, just because it's nice and easy to make. Or, of course, you could use one of the pre-made grocery store alternatives that are available these days. And then finally, in terms of dairy items and specifically butter, we talked about the pros and cons of using the tub butters over the block butters and the stick butter alternatives that are available. And my recommendation is that you experiment with what is best for you to buy, bearing in mind that some of those plant-based alternatives do have other allergens as well in them, which may be a cause for concern for your customers. So that concludes my presentation for you today on allergy baking for cookies. I really hope that it's answered some of the questions you may have had in regards to substitutions and will enable you to feel much more confident going forward when you try experimenting with your own recipes. Now, of course, things are always changing with ingredients for allergy baking, and by no means do I know everything. But of course, if you do have any questions, you can always reach out to me. I'm always happy to help, especially as I know how overwhelming this journey can be for people when you don't know where to start. Thanks everyone, and have a great day. Happy baking!